Am I live? Am I live? It's the question I always ask. I don't know. These are computers. I'm a boomer. Hello, welcome to the 5 Games for Doomsday stream. Every week, usually on a Wednesday, but it's on a Tuesday, and we've got a special occasion this time because we are here with the co-designer developer of Floe, the new hot game on Kickstarter, Johnny Pac. I'm going to ask him a few questions, and then, if you'd like, put your questions in the chat, and I will put them directly to Johnny, and he will answer all your concerns about the show. So let's bring him on, Jonathan Pac. Johnny, there he is, wearing an owl hat. How are you?
My Arhu hat. I'm doing all right, thanks.
How is the desert?
The desert is very snowy right now, so it's the high desert.
Snowy right now,
and it is. I could actually, give you a glimpse of it, but yeah, the whole thing is beautiful snow right now out there. Yeah.
So for the viewers who don't know, Johnny lives at the edge of Reno on the desert, and you look over and you see the Sierra Mountains on one side and the brush desert rolling off into the other. It is absolutely magical. It's which if you drive into Reno, you realize Reno itself isn't very magical, but where Johnny lives is lovely. Anyway, okay. So first of all, then, I guess we should. So Henry's not going to be with us because he's ill, right? He's currently under the weather, so he's not going to join the stream, I guess.
Right. Yeah, he sent me a little message saying he wasn't feeling that great right now. So just me today, so that's all you get.
Yeah. Well, you're the good-looking one. So, first of all, tell us about Floe, how the idea came up, and sort of what the game is and what you want it to be in its final printing.
Yeah, obviously, I think a lot of the people that we've got watching the stream are probably excited backers, and so they want to get their hands on this juicy thing. But Floe is it's Pika's first venture into publishing, but Pika's an imprint, a sister company to Fantasia Games, where there's a lot of the same teams. So like the team that you would see behind Endless Winter, which was our first project, followed up by Unconscious Mind and Dream World and Sweet Mess, and some other stuff we have planned coming out soon. So it's a foray in a slightly different direction. So we have an imprint, and the games, there's some questions which are probably going to come up saying, like, what's the difference between a Pika game? What's the difference with a Fantasia game? But in short, this is our first title, and it's a pretty ambitious one. It's bigger than what may come in the following Pika games, but the scope isn't really the defining factor. Pika is not strictly small games. It can be large as well. It's a kind of a big mashup of a game. It's got Euro mechanisms at its core. You think about Henry Audubon, you think about his very elegant games that he designs, where it's picking up resources through usually some really clever mechanism, whether that's space octopus or kind of a cool Moncala mechanism in parks and things like that. And then you gather those resources and you fulfill contracts of sorts and do a little bit of engine building. That's one of the amazing things about his designs, that they're very crystalline and how that goes. So there is that feeling of Henry's work there, but this is bigger than some of his previous work, right? In scope, it's a longer game, it's a bigger game, longer to set up. It's got minis, it's got mini games within other games. So it's got that fundamental feel, but then it's also got an expansive world building feel, which we could attribute a lot to the artwork of Andrew Bosley and the art direction and world building of Yoma. So he's kind of the mastermind behind what you'll see with a lot of the highly thematic content that comes out of both these studios.
And so, what was the genesis of the game? How did the idea come about, and how did you get the team together to make the game?
Henry and I have just been talking about design and stuff like that as friends, because we have a lot of interests in common, and I admire his work and he admired mine. We just started chatting back and forth, and I was like, oh yeah, I work with the studio. And then I kind of was like, hey, do you want to do a game with these guys, because they're really fun to work with? And the guys were excited, and we said, yeah, sure, let's spitball an idea. So they started coming up with different things. They said, hey, do you want to do another nature game? Are you the parks guy? And he's like, well, I don't want to tread on that, because Trails was coming out near that same time. He didn't want to do Trails and then also have some other sort of nature themed game. And there's a lot of nature themed games coming out, so let's do something different, right? And Yoma had this idea of this snowy fantasy world kind of running in the background, and we were looking for a designer to help us build that. And the first person I actually reached out to was Kevin Russ, who did Calico. And he's a great guy, but he's very elusive. He usually lives in his van or on the hiking trail somewhere taking beautiful nature photography. He's just disappears off the map for months at a time. And so it'd be like every 6 months I'd hear from Kevin, like, yeah, I'd like to make a game. Cool. Want to talk next Monday? 6 months later, yeah. So that didn't really work out as much as I love Kevin. It's yeah. So we basically said, hey, Henry, do you want to do this and build something with the team from scratch? And that's where it started. Just a lot of meetings, and we had Bosley on deck pretty much right away because he's the critter guy. If you want to have cool critters in your game, you got to have Bosley. So it was kind of the almost thing to create yet another super group if you could.
And so this is on Pika, and you've said that it's not necessarily typical of what Pika will do in the future. But what was the decision behind making this a Pika game and not a Fantasia game?
I think there's a little bit of evolution with it because originally we were thinking it would be a slightly smaller game, but the nature of the game is how do you make like a small box adventure game that feels expansive, like you can do all sorts of stuff without it actually being big. And that became a challenge because it's like sure there's things like tiny epic such and such game, but those really don't feel as, I mean they are tiny and they're epic, but they are tiny. We wanted to make something as bigger, and so is it simply where you're just going to supersize all the parts and have them large but still have 30-minute playtime and a very price point that's not really reflective of it because it's just an enormous game? Or do we want to actually add enough levers to pull and things to play around with and to explore, not just thematically, but actually you're exploring the product. You're learning about new cards and new systems and little mini games and all this stuff through the process, and that's analogous to what's going on. So in its scope, it just needed to be bigger than a small, entry level, simple 30-45 minute game like that. So it grew. And so I think what's going to happen, what we're going to see is basically if we looked at the Pika catalog and the Fantasia's catalog, is the Pika is going to be stuff that's in the, like, let's say BGG weight, it's going to go up to about 3.0. And it's going to be south of that on the other side. And Fantasia is going to start around 3.0, and it's going to crest like 4. Like Unconscious Mind is hovering around the 4 area. And so what's happening right now is we're actually seeing the upper end of Pika and the bottom end of Fantasia kind of touching each other, and that's where it's a little bit confusing. Whereas if this title was leaning one side and one the other, they say, oh yeah, there's a distinction. But there actually is kind of a line there where we're not going to let the complexity creep of this game run itself into a 3.5 weight on BGG. We will streamline it back until it feels like it's the right weight for the brand.
And is there also a thematic consideration with Pika, that it's going to be more of the cute animals, not kids games necessarily, but less sort of, I mean, Sigmund Freud doesn't seem like a particularly Pika kind of subject.
Right. That's kind of a big thing. Like sometimes what we were saying, just as a quick response, is if you think like movies and you think Pixar might be something like that, or family-friendly sort of stuff. It's still clever. It's beautiful and all that. And then you've got Stanley Kubrick, where it might be a little artsy and work with some more difficult themes to take on. They might have more historical reference, but that's not to say that Pika could actually do something that is not a fantasy game or something like that. But it's always going to be something that there's something for everybody, and there's going to be no real challenges to work around with that theme. It's like everybody can love adventuring critters, right, and really not have that. But we knew that we worked on a game about Sigmund Freud. There's going to be some pushback on that, and there's also just a lot of things we can't include in a board game about Sigmund Freud and have it still be a PG-13 board game. There's just a lot of trimming we had to do, and we had to get cultural consultants and be very sensitive about a lot of things, and obviously admit some stuff too. And
I'm hoping for the Oedipus complex card.
I know, right? Yeah, you should have seen some of the funny stuff we wrote on the prototypes. I can't say on camera, but no, in the final version, it's very focused on the dreams and psychology and that sort of thing. But still, is like Z Garcia from the Dice Tower said, he said this is a very adult game, and not the sense that it has any dirty humor or anything like that. But it's a game whose theme is it's a mature theme in its sense, right? And the Pika catalog is just going to be something that really anybody could grasp what we're trying to say with the theme there, whether that's a game about nature or interior design or whatever else we may be thinking of. It's just something that's going to be very, very family friendly and not to say like pedestrian, but it's going to be accessible.
So we're getting lots of questions in already. Please
Great.
continue. I'm going to get to them in a minute. I've just got a few more questions for Johnny, but I've got them here on my list, so don't stress. We'll get to them in a second. So I was speaking to you about Flow in the summer when I was over in the States, and I got the impression that it was a narrative game, that it was something of an ongoing campaign game. Is it a legacy game? And can you talk about the unlocking system?
Yeah, a little bit. So I know there's a lot of questions about that. So one of the things as me designer and all that and developer, and we don't really rely on like a choose your own adventure narrative sort of thing where you're going to read a lot of text. It's going to give you some binary choice. You meet somebody, do you help them or do you hurt them? Do you take their stuff or not? And then it's going to lead you this way with multiple endings, and you kind of like play out this scripted plot that we hire, good writers and that sort of thing. It's really not that type of game. So what we're trying to do is invoke an emergent story from the gameplay. So the things you do, you could tell the story of what you accomplished. I started at the village, and then I went out and I gathered the things. I went back and I built this home, and then I got some soup over here, and then I went on this big adventure into the cave. And so you're going to talk about the sequential forays that you're going to go out in your hero's journey to greatness, right? And that's really kind of where we lean on. You can tell a story about this. The game tells a story, but other than some flavor text, which is still going to be kind of ambiguous, you're never going to really weave together a definitive plot per se, right? And there's not going to be a certain particular ending that you're trying to arrive at, and no like spoilers like, oh my gosh, so and so dies on page 32. It just doesn't really work that way. So with that, we do think it's kind of a nerdy term, but progressive disclosure is something that is kind of a cool idea in design in general, that you can, if people get overwhelmed with learning a game or anything like that, you kind of look at how much do you actually have to give somebody at first to get them going. Right. And so they start to feel and learn through more than just one method, just the rules, whatever else. And then you reveal the next thing, and then the context is already there, and they go, oh, that's cool. Just for instance, organically, I'm a big Carcassonne fan, and the game started off very, very simple. And then I've got like almost every expansion and box that's ever happened with that. And I tried to play them all at once one time, and I got 5 hours into a game. We only got halfway through all the tiles, and we had just sheets and sheets of rules. And in its final story, if you try to play Kitchen Sink Carcassonne, it's almost impossible to play. There's just too much. But over the years, you think about the progressive spies. Like, oh, here's a little module. This lets you take a kite and fly into the next tile. And there's a little dragon that eats your guy. Oh, okay. Everything is not overwhelming. But if I bought all the Carcassonne stuff at once and tried to play it all at once like that, I would say this is the most convoluted, crazy thing I've ever seen. This is bonkers, right? And so just the fact that it rolled out over time and there's mix and match stuff, I feel comfortable with any amount of that content. I just don't want it all at once. And so we want to do something where we introduce more complex ideas and more levers to pull through the course of play. So it's like your introductory game is one thing, then we'll introduce a little bit more gamery stuff, levers to pull, and then in addition to that, we'll have kind of like booster packs where it's like, okay, backer says, oh, there's only 4 landmarks. So on the first game, we're going to see all 4 landmarks. On the second game, we're going to see all the same 4 landmarks. It's like, well, no, not so much. We're going to have more landmarks for you. So it's that kind of content, and it's like, well, what does that new landmark do? I see that there's a lighthouse. What's the lighthouse do when you go to the lighthouse, right? And so that's where the gameplay elements will kind of change, as we'll introduce these sorts of new things. Like, what are these monsters going to do? Because there's monsters in a cave, but the Monsters Unleashed expansion has these minis, and it's like you're going to have topographical monsters that you're going to be encountering in a different method, say, than the subterranean ones in the cave. And that's going to be something, if we drop that on day one, the first thing you do, again, it's like, there's so much to learn in this game. We had to talk about it 30 minutes, where you warm up to that through progressive disclosure, you're going to be pretty excited to encounter those monsters for the first time.
And how challenging is because I tend not to gravitate towards sandbox games for that very reason, that you're just given 1,000 options and you just look at it and go, what am I supposed to do? Whereas Agricola is a great example of progressive disclosure, which is a term I've just learned. The way it leads you into the game, and it reveals complexity as the game develops. So it's almost got an inbuilt tutorial system, even though you don't really think about it that way. How difficult is that as a design process?
I think that's actually a great example of that, because there's actually another level of that is there is a family mode of that game that doesn't have a bunch of the drafting of the cards and rule
It's not worth
stuff.
playing, but there is a family mode.
It does exist, yeah. And when I first played, actually, that's how I learned it, because that was it came out and it was all the rage, and worker placement was fairly novel, and how cutthroat that worker placement one versus, say, like Stone Age or something. It was much meaner, say, than some of those other games. And then learning about the different types of animals and the feeding seasons and the progressive part of that as it goes out over the course, you learn this little arc of that game, right? And there's a lot there, and that's just the beginning. So I think it's a great case study for that in a given game. So sorry if we get a whole tangent there, but that's kind of where we're going as far as is the guidedness of this is. We do want to give people a little bit more of a lifeline. We noticed in some playtesting that you can go and acquire secret goal cards. You can go acquire a quest. And so you almost have to go get the thing that's going to tell you to get the thing. And I think that's coming from our background, my background a little bit with like the Eurogame ethos, where there's a lot of people who don't want a really asymmetrical player power or a hidden goal, because they don't say, now I have to do the corn strategy because I got the corn starting card, and I want to do the temple track, and now I have to be the corn guy. Thanks, you railroaded me into doing this thing. And so we get a lot of pushback on asymmetry. As much as we get demand for, I want to have a special given thing that I do, and I want to draft that thing, like say Terra Mystica or something like that. And so that we're kind of struggling between those things. And I think the happy medium here is going to be give people something at the beginning to guide them. Let's say we give them a starting quest card, and maybe one of those starting like ally cards where you actually have a little feather moving along to go to the next spot right out the gates. It might just guide you. It's like, first go get a piece of wood, okay, and then go build a house. Oh, neat. And now you've got your engine started, and then you can decide for yourself how you want to run that engine. Which building did you pick out? It produces maps, maybe you should go explore. And so that's kind of going to lead to another nerdy word that not dirty word.
I'm loving the way my lexicon's being expanded.
So it's basically a path dependent strategy happens. So the thing that happened before your next thing is going to give you context to do whatever it may be. Because I built the building through whatever means gets me the map, suddenly that option is more viable than pivoting to something else, and I start to identify as the map person. Then I go flip over the tile, and I'm the explorer, and I'm the first to discover this particular thing or resource, and that sends me diving. And then I get a key, or maybe I should go get a treasure chest, right? And so you start to just follow the trail of these different things, and the game kind of tips you off. But it does, I think, need that first couple like dominoes to kind of tip it over a little bit, to not just feel like an arbitrary sandbox. What is the best opening move when there's so many things you can do? I don't know. I guess I'll do something, and it feels kind of weird. We don't want people to feel uncomfortable like that. Just here's some simple stuff you can do, but ultimately you can go and pivot and do whatever you want, because it is still a sandbox. You can ignore those things if you want to, not like lose the game because of it.
So one more question before I get to the viewers' questions,
Sure.
because I'm sure they're tired of listening to my voice. But we all like to imagine that we're all airy-fairy intellectual people, and it's truly the mechanical interactions that make games special, and anything as facile as componentry is unimportant. But we all know that that's not true. And so how important is the art and componentry in Flow to giving an immersive experience in the game?
That's a great question, because one of the things, like one of our slogans with the Fantasia brand is art and play. And so we really care about that. And if we wanted to reduce the footprint of something to its absolute bare minimum, I mean, we could look at how small like a roll and write game is. They take a lot of information, they compress it down to like Hadrian's Wall or something, and it's like it's still the size of a phone book, but it's like there's a lot of information in a very tight area. And you could do things like that if you're trying to make a small footprint game, but does that actually feel right? And so I think what we're looking at right now is, for instance, we're getting a lot of people saying, will this even fit on my table? My table's this big, it's a standard size table. I don't know if I could fit 4 players around this thing. And then we go, well, in today's day and age, we got these big gaming tables. Of course you can fit, but that's presumptuous to think people can do that. So we need to kind of look back and go, can we shrink the board, say 10%, to make room on an average, say European table size for the player boards, and to be comfortable with a little bit elbow room and still be able to reach over, see everything, grab everything, and get that kind of big feel. Like, for instance, if this was a tiny epic sort of thing, if we're using little tweezers and trying to move an itty bitty figure to go down a little itty bitty cave, to me it kind of trivializes it. So it's like if you go into you got a big chunky figure and you plop it over here to pick something up, that feels a certain way. And if you have big dice and you chuck them out there, actually there's a crash to it. Whereas if we use, I don't know, 12 millimeter dice, it'd be, this little dainty thing, and it's like, okay, I fought, and it just doesn't feel chunky.
Right.
So we use oversized dice for that, and they feel good, right? It just everything has that kind of like chunky, robust kind of feel. There are some small, cuter elements where it's like, sure, here's a mini card that's got a little something, a little treasure on it. But we knew that was supposed to feel small and cute, like a little potion or a little box. But the other things, like a landmark card, for instance, we chose a French tarot size card on purpose. Yeah, we didn't need it. Did not need to be that big, but it showcases Bosley's artwork, and we use without a frame around the artwork. We don't do like the Magic the Gathering thing where this is where the artwork go and the rest is UX, and you got to learn all this stuff. It's like, nope, we'll from here down, we'll have the information, and from here up, we want this bleedless, beautiful artwork, and just let you just look at that card and be like, this is great. I want a poster of this, and maybe I can get a poster of this. So there's a lot of extra space given to let the atmosphere breathe on top of just functionality. Long answer, but it's very important to us.
Wonderful. So I'm going to get to the questions from the people, and if people have got non-English or American names, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of your names. I apologize in advance. Unless it's German, then I'm fine. All right. Oh, this was Sugar Circuit. I think I can handle that. Hi. Can you please talk at a high level about how you see the progression of the unlocks affecting gameplay? For example, will it make it faster, harder, tighter, more asymmetric, more 4X, etc.? You kind of touched on it, but if you could expand.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on that already. So if we kind of think about the progressive disclosure, the booster pack idea that you're going to get more, it's not to say more of the same stuff, because we want qualitative differences. Like if there's a new cave event card and you go land on an event, we want it to do something different. Like, oh, this one gives you a free crystal and this one lets you trade pearl for 2 crystals. It's not going to be something that's just transactional like that. It is qualitatively different. We want it to actually feel like, oh, cool, that did something strange to the game and feels different, right? So the booster packs, even though it's, yeah, sure, it might just be a card, but it might turn a system kind of on its end a little bit. So you can expect some things like that. And with the Monsters expansion, you're going to automatically kind of see that there's going to be some more stuff. There's going to be these topographical adversaries that you're going to go and fight. There's a co-op mode where the players not only have to do lots of normal flow things to a minimum degree, they also have to go put out a certain amount of these fires and not let the whole land get overtaken. So it's like, how do we efficiently do all this? And then the next one, you're going to have to fight more monsters and more monsters. It's just like, it builds, right? So there's that. As far as the 4X question, I know we kind of like put out there and said, hey, it's 4X styles. In a lot of ways, there are a lot of things that are similar to a lighter 4X game in this, but it doesn't have the player versus player combat. And we're not going to introduce that if anybody's wondering, like, oh, cool, you open up this envelope and suddenly you can go beat each other up and steal each other's flow stones and turn this into capture the flag or something. It's still going to be competitive or cooperative, but it's not going to have a direct no direct attacks or take that sort of cards will be introduced into it. So if we expand on the expansion X, yep, we're going to have some new tiles and things you can explore, new landmarks like that. And as far as the exploit goes, it's like, yep, there's going to be some new things that you can gather and ways to use them in, the exploring and all that sort of stuff. And then the X's, as far as we see the X, is going to be that you're fighting the monsters in the cave. And there's going to be different types of things that you can use the combat dice to go deal with, right? And that X will kind of be expanded in that direction as well.
So next question is from Matthew Gonzalez, and it's not directly about flow, but I think it's possibly the most important question we're going to get today, which is, I'm here to ask the hard-hitting questions of what sweet Crocs Mr. Pac is wearing today.
Well, I don't have them on right now, but when I did go out this morning, I'll tell you about them. I've got these all-terrain Crocs that have like a harder bottom on them because we've got these goat head thistles out here that are just awful, and they embed themselves.
So these are like hiking Crocs.
They're like hiking Crocs, and they have a few less holes in the front, so if you don't stub your toe. And I got aftermarket vegan leather embedded straps for them with spurs that go on the side for my little Western kicks. I was wearing my tricked out, mountaineer Crocs this morning when I was handling some stuff out there in the snow. And then yesterday before that, I was actually deeper in the snow, and I've got Crocs that don't have the holes in them whatsoever, so I could go deeper into the snow and not soak my socks. So
is there anything they can't do?
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I think there's a Croc for everybody.
So, Justin and Hannah, hey Johnny, I spoke to you a bit about the map tiles and why they aren't given the same level up ability when a flow stone is placed on them. Will there be other functions for them in the expansion or end game scoring quests pertaining to them?
Yeah, so there are things in the game that kind of say, have a flow stone. I think these are in the spoiler envelope. I'm gonna spill a little spoilers. Like have a flow stone on a different map tile, or have them on the same map tile. So there's gonna be some positional elements that you're gonna get bonus points at the end of the game for having your stones in particular areas. But the most exciting thing about that is there's going to be actually some perks to having your stones out there on spots. That's going to give you access to certain parts of that spot, save warmth, use the ship, and do some things with that because of that spot. So right now it's like, if you think about it, it's like, oh, I'll just hold on to all my stones, and then when they're ready, I'll just go spray them out at the end of the game and just get the points out of them and kind of sandbag a little bit. There's going to be a lot of incentive to be like, I should get this out and put this on this spot because that's going to become a hub for where I'm going to do some other things that are going to pin that. So it's, if you think about it, it's going to be more of like a beacon for where we can attach other mechanisms. Like you can do this where you have a flow stone. So and that's something that's just kind of lacking in the demo copies. We did send a couple of those cards out, but we actually put them in an envelope, so the reviewers weren't playing with those ones yet.
So Glückzwerg, which means lucky dwarf in English. So German, I'm fine. If your name's German, I'm fine. So I have a question for Jonathan. Who's your favorite hero, and why is it Arhoot?
Yeah, exactly. So if you didn't notice, I'm a big owl fan. So I've got about 300 owl figurines around the place.
What is it with the owls? Explain the owl obsession.
I think they're just neat, and I'm very much a night person. And we talk about larks in the morning and owls at night. So a lot of times I work at night, and I feel like I'm at my peak creativity about that. I just find them fascinating. So I love cats, I love owls. And it's just probably, you're weird to say, oh, it's my spirit animal. I'd say it's something like that, where there's a connection there for some reason. So yeah, I've got just tons of owls in my house and identify with that. And when we were working on the box cover, actually the little dude with the ears was in the front, and I was like, could we really make the owl guy in the front? And it was like, this box is almost done. I was like, please. And so they did, and I was really happy to put him, at the front of the box. And so that's why. Yeah, Arhoot's awesome.
The corrupt owl lobby affecting our games.
I know.
So logs. Any details on how the monster expansion plays? Anything about the other add-on mentioned in Kickstarter calendar you can tell us yet?
So I'll spoil a little bit about the monsters, how that goes. So there's been some concern that say you flip over a map tile, and the most exciting thing about flipping over a map tile is what landmark card did you draw, and then what comes out of the bag and populates it, and that sort of thing. And they connect in very different ways. Like if you play the game multiple times, the icebergs are going to kind of go different ways. The water connections will be different because there's a lot of variability in that. But if people say, oh, it's just more of the same, there's just water and there's ice, why don't these do something different? Part of the thing that with the monsters expansion is that we're creating a terrain that is for this particular creature, like their lair. So this tile flips over, and this is the Kraken's lair, and that's going to have some different topographical features and things you can do with that. It's kind of baked right into the UX versus saying, here's a tile and here's a mix and match thing. This is going to work more for that, and that's going to allow us to have some more rules that pertain to a certain thing, because otherwise you have to think about, like, what are all the contingencies? If the Kraken shows up on this land, but there's only so many places around it, yada yada, how does this actually work? Where we can sculpt something and be like, oh, okay, he spawns here, and the players can interact with it from these vantage points, and here's where a tentacle might pop up, that kind of thing, right? And so I think that's where we're going to see kind of a hybrid of, it's exciting to see what the monsters do because they're going to be exciting. It's also going to be exciting to see that what this layer actually does and how that interacts and changes the feel of the game in that expansion.
So I assume this is BJ from Board Game Gumbo. He says,
hey
Johnny Pac, can't wait to play Unconscious Mind, and Flow looks fantastic. Congratulations on all the success.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, BJ's great. It's fun to be on his show too.
So Axel Vramemore, I'm sure I've absolutely mangled that. Do you feel like Flow became a bit more complex than you expected as the project progressed? Because there seems to be a lot of frozen meat in the icy islands.
There's a little bit, yeah. So there's some of those where it's like power creep and all that sort of thing. I think at certain points we've gotten a little carried away with just how wide the game is. With some of the critics have said about that. And I think luckily when we work on games, we don't use Kickstarter as a a pre-order system where the game is effectively done. We just go there to rake in a bunch of money and then just ship the game right away or something like that, or pretend like we're working on it. That these games, we bring them up to a certain point on purpose, and then we like to get the feedback, and we like to actually see what some of the reviewers do. So think about it, it's like if we had a finished game, we send it to Rado and he loves it. That's awesome because people know exactly what they're going to get. If we have a not quite finished game, we send it to Rado and he likes most of it, but then at the end he rambles for 15 minutes about what he doesn't like. That is a giant opportunity to work on those things because he's very insightful, address those issues, and that's going to better suit his audience and ultimately lead to a better game. And even outside of this studio doing that, every time I've sent Rado something in the past, I'm very, very conscious of, say, what he has to say about it and adjusting that. And where, say, even Alex Radcliffe going like, is the juice worth the squeeze? There's a lot of upfront rules. Is it worth it with the payoff strategically? And we take that to heart and go like, oh, if you think about it, we just drop all these rules on people. There's a long teach, and then you do such and such stuff. Does it actually feel as satisfying as a game of, say, the same amount of teach, ultimately a heavier game that has more crunchy, agonizing decisions through it versus a lighter sandbox feeling where there's interconnected mini games? So I think we do want to like scale it back and be like, what's the nucleus of this, the best experience we can get with that? And if we want people to get booster packs and open up and make it wider in more variety, they can. But we would like to make it so it is more accessible up front and doesn't have that same kind of overwhelming impact.
So Ryan Mitchell asks, currently backing at the all-in, and just want a confirmation that everything will fit in one box with the exception of the neoprene playmats.
Yeah, in our we have a little group chat where we trade off who's answering comments and things like that, or if it's a development question, they ask me to come in, all that. So, but we have so many funny little memes going about like, does the playmat fit in the box? But yeah, the box is specially designed to fit everything because we're aware that people want to have everything in the same box and have nice trays and all that. So that's one of the nice things about getting the Kickstarter edition is you will get that, and it's going to be packed very nicely. And even again, like some of the stuff isn't quite done. We're getting saying like, oh, we want trays that we can just pull out, take off the lid, and this is effectively set up. And we go, oh yeah, we can do that with some things. Other things it's kind of unnecessary where it's like, this holds the minis and they're mix and match, so it's not necessarily like this is the green mini, right? So so basically, yeah, the playmats do not fit in the box. With the smaller playmat, which think a different game, but yeah, the playmats don't fit in the box. We're not going to fit them in the box. If you don't want them, there's going to be some tiers that allow you to get everything and then not add the playmats, because there was some concern about that too. And basically, the pledge manager, you can pick and choose what you want and how you want it.
So Ash asks, I'd love to hear more about the solo mode. Can you give details on how it will be structured?
Yeah, so I do the solo modes for our current catalog. So I did the development on the solo mode for Endless Winter, but I didn't design that one. But for Sweet Mess, I had a lot of work on that, and I did the entire solo mode for Unconscious Mind. So the way we like to do it is to make it feel like a two-player game is our bottom principle. So it's not going to be like something just beat your own score. You've got 5 rounds to put your flow stones out there, and if you can do it in 4 rounds, you're awesome. If you do it in 6 rounds, you're not so awesome. We like to make it feel like you're competing against something. But that said, we don't want to actually automate really hard decisions that are like auction games are really hard to do, and spatial games are sometimes really hard to do. So it's going to be something we're going to feel the pressure of kind of what another player is going to do to put the heat on you, to take things away and push your tempo. But you're not going to have to sit here and go, okay, the bot's going to spend 3 warmth and go south 2 spaces, right 2 spaces, then pick up the kelp if there's a kelp. But if it already has a kelp, it's not going to pick up a kelp and go down this giant flow chart of administrative stuff, when ultimately what we want the feeling is that if I don't get that kelp, the bot might hoover it up by the time I go get it. So I need to make a hard decision. Do I lunge for it now, or do I let it sit and risk and do something else I want to do and push the tempo of the game, obviously. So you're not going to be rolling dice for the bot to go and have combat with a monster, but the bot might interact with a monster in a much more streamlined way. You flip over a card, it's going to tell you this is what the bot may or may not do. It's going to work with the monsters. It goes into the first thing. It takes that monster out of the thing. It scores what it's going to score out of it and replaces that with a new one. So you're going to feel like things are getting refreshed and taken out of the economy about the same rate as you would with a 2-player game, and things will open up in an opportunistic way in a similar thing too. Like if you're in a 2-player game and you just kind of sit back and let the other person do the exploring, and it's like that, you can kind of count on the bot to do positive and negative things about the same pace that a player would. And the difficulty scaling is just going to be kind of how aggressive they are at doing those things. So if we want a lighter game, it's like, you can kind of get your bearings. But if you really want like a cutthroat race where it's like very hard to beat the bot, we will have things to up the challenge. And there's really no reason that you couldn't play with the subsidiary content, all the modules, expansions. Even if the bot doesn't really care which landmark it does, it might go and interact with it. You will still get to play with, say, a landmarks effect and get to feel that variety in the solo game and not feel like a bunch of the content was cut out because it was not compatible solo. We're going to make it so that if you buy this game just for yourself, you're going to be able to play with everything and have fun with it.
So, Rohika, in regards to theme, are you considering adapting the theme, more specifically the victory point part of it, and replacing it with more thematic stroke fitting victory conditions or narratives in the game?
I wouldn't say we're going to replace that. So it's one of the things that we're trying to sway away from is like the I'm one of the admins on the Euro Facebook group, and somebody always asks the question, "What is a Euro game?" And people always say, "Oh, it's worker placement." But then you say Euro games are around a lot longer than worker placement. And somebody came up with one of the things to say, "Well, one of the main things that they think is acquiring points." It's like, sure, there's scoring in all kinds of games that have points, but I get what they meant. It's just getting a lot of points from a lot of different sources, up to the point where there's a kind of pejorative point salad thing. And I personally love a point salad game.
Me too.
But if you look at Flow, it's one of those games where the points have been, sure, maybe they're out there, the incremental points, but they all come together to make these bigger, chunkier points. And so if we should look at other games that use a similar example, we might look at Dune Imperium might be a good idea with the low scoring. Rise of Tribes has a low threshold. I think it's 15 points in that one. Istanbul is a good example of trying to raise to a certain amount of gems that you're collecting. And so if we thought about kind of the different ethos of the victory point scoring, it's like we could look at the Feldian sort of thing. I'm a big Feld fan, but you could say, I could blindfold myself, throw a meeple at a game board, and I'll probably hit a victory point, right? And you're just going to be dinging victory points the whole time. And everything you do is going to be worth, I do this is worth 6 points. I do this for 12 points, and they're going to be worth more than the sum of the single action you do. So I do one thing, and it's going to be worth probably more than 1 point net. And even if I did one thing now and another thing later and I get 10, well, each of those two things effectively is worth 5 points. This is kind of the opposite way. So you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to gather that, you're going to bring this over here, and you're finally going to put all that together, and you're going to get a point for it. And so you kind of think about what that means is this was worth, an eighth of a point over here to get the item, and that was worth an eighth of a point to go over here and bring the item to this spot, and then upgrade this and do all these other things until finally piecemeals into a place that you've got your flow stone unlocked, you could place it, or you've satisfied a condition through a piecemeal like that. So everything kind of collapses into these highly concentrated victory points. And so that leaves us with some limits of the design space, because it's really easy to balance games when you can say, this is good on, like, say, 8 out of 10 scale, just how good it is, and this thing is 6 good for what it does in utility. Okay, well, let's make everything a 10, so we'll just add 2 victory points to that one. We'll add 4 victory points to this, so the difference is in utility and victory points, and you're just making an assessment of, like, what's the utility versus victory point ratio in the stuff, and you just balance the books, you create a spreadsheet, and it just creates a game for you. We don't have that option with something like this. Everything has to amass to these highly concentrated points, so the balancing is like, we can't say, oh, get the dagger and 1 victory point. We can't do that. The dagger has to be worth its utility in order to drive you to that thing in a race for the point. So it's not just a matter of scoring the most over a set number of rounds. It's how do I accumulate those intense victory points before my other players do an efficiency race to outmaneuver these things tactically. So that's it. Thematically, I don't know if we call them hero stones, flow stones, or put them in the shrines, or we have some concerns. Is this invoking magic or anything like that? It's like we probably won't pin much more on it besides that, except for the thematics behind, like an end game goal card is going to have a thematic text, like why you want to have flowstones say on different icebergs like that. There's going to be a card in the context why you might want to do that, because you want things spread out or you want things consolidated, much like the scoring cards of, say, Kingdom Builder. It's like isolationists, and it's like get all your little houses as far away from each other as you possibly can in different clusters. And then you get some other thing where it's like, river folk, and you want to cluster all your stuff next to the river. So those scoring cards basically shape the terrain of, say, a game like Kingdom Builder in a similar way that we'd say might influence where you put your stones and when and how you put them out there, which ones qualitatively put out, where they are positionally, and even the frequency at which you put them out. You might want to get something out early to get income paybacks from it with some of these other modules.
So Alex Kazik, so the game states to be not legacy, and yet stickers will be added to the manual, which is the definition of legacy. A lot of confidence there. What now?
So basically, like, if one thing I think about with legacy games is that there's kind of a destructive element with those things. Like, you're forced to, like, tear a card in half or go this way or draw on something or put a sticker on a board that once that sticker on the board, you're not really able to peel it off. So the stickering thing here isn't actually like that. So if you've played something like, let's say, like Queensdale, the Inca Marcus Brand legacy game, that's a proper legacy game. You go through and play it, and you can't really replay the game. But there is something neat about that, is when rules get revealed, you get to include a component, and then you go and you take a sticker and you place this new rule into the rule book to kind of avoid spoilers. And so in a sense, it's like we could either give you the sticker to do that, or we could have printed them upside down and backwards and said, Simba, don't go into the back of the book and look at these things. And you go to look at entry number 26, but you end up seeing entry number 27, and you're like, oh, okay. So it's just basically a way to keep the suspense going, and you're going to craft a rule book. If you wanted to, you could just open up all the stickers and put them all in the back of the book and just tell yourself you're not going to read them. But I don't think that's destroying the book. I think it's actually constructing the book how it's intended to be, and there's no binary decision, like either put this sticker here or that one there, and they have the same parking spots. Like, no, it's just, again, progressive disclosure is basically all that's happening. So to me, I actually think it's different than a proper legacy game. We say, if I punch the sprues on a new Carcassonne and throw the sprue away, is that a legacy game? No, because the sprue is just holding the pieces together when it was shipped to me. And in this sense, we're just withholding some of the rules until the proper context is there, so that the experience rolls out.
So Justin and Hannah again, I've noticed changes in the map as far as where the shallow waters and docks are. Any chance that that will be something that's variable on setup, such as with tiles to block of docks, etc.?
I don't think so. We have made some changes because of the connectivity of some of those things. So one of the things I've been reworking with me and Andrew, and where the docks are, and because it's an efficiency race, to be like, if I go by water this way, if I go by land that way, you can kind of count out whether you're going to save warmth or not. Is kind of one of the main concerns. And ultimately, like, what are you doing when you get there and how you pick things up. And some of the changes that we've seen between certain builds and the current builds is that the water connectivity is a little bit better than it was originally. And that was to basically make it that if 50% of the time the boat was faster, 50% not, it was usually a fruitless effort to kind of count out, like, the boat goes 1, 2, 3, 4 warmth. Or if I go by land, it's 4 warmth either way. Okay, I guess I'll take the boat. It's no fun to watch somebody just count and end up one way or the other. So by removing certain glacier spaces and making the water connectivity higher, the boats will generally outrun the rate of going a long distance by foot in the game. And so that led to some of that. And some of the other small changes that we're probably going to roll out is going to be exactly where the familiar spots in the shallows are, as far as being able to acquire certain things, certain rules about occupancy. It's like, should there be more or less spaces in there to make that tension? Because that's one of those things where it's like a worker placement game where you move your hero to this spot to do an action, and then within that proximity, you get to do a second worker placement action, this 1-2 punch. And it's one of the unique things about this game. And so we do want to make sure that there's not going to be this chance where I want to go here with my hero, but there's nothing good for my familiar to do. So therefore, I don't know, what do I do? We want there to be something fun to do every time you scope out, like, which of these I want to do it all. Which one do I choose versus all of this is terrible, I guess I'll wait, or not I don't know what to do, right? So it actually takes longer, there's more downtime if there's no good choice and you just have to kind of scour which bad choice you're going to take versus a whole bunch of good choices. Then you have that kind of dopamine hit of deciding which one you actually select, right? So we're going to see some variants like that, but we probably won't put like more tokens on the board. Say this blocks this dock for this game. It's like probably it's that happens with the revealing of the docks. That if you put this tile in the upper right corner, its connectivity is going to be different than if it was in the lower left, and there may or may not be docks in the same spot or kind of what might seem like a bypass or things like that, or where the caves end up, where the flags end up, where the monsters end up, that kind of thing. And you'll have to kind of choose the geography. And then ultimately the players decide which tiles they open up in the course of the game. So it's not like they all just left, first, right, reads like a book. It's like you could go down to the southeast part of the board and open up that first because there's something there you think is more valuable to you. Say it's a cave or whatever else.
So we have something similar to this, but how flexible do you think the game will be when it comes to variants?
That's a good question. So we do want to have that very friendly intro mode because we know that the theme is appealing to something. So, people are just like, oh, I love some of Andrew Bozzi's other critter games. I want to play this, but I'm intimidated by the weight or something like that. I heard it's
and you don't want to falsely advertise as well, right? If it looks friendly on the box, it should be kind of easy to get into.
Yeah, it's not going to be creature comfort. It's kind of like gateway level light, and it might be something a little heavier than that. But I would say that if you're a family of gamers, and this isn't your first foray into board games, that you shouldn't really have a problem getting that. And as say your kids are learning and growing and learning about games and getting older, they're also going to have something in there for them to play. So we do want to have a very a good onboarding experience with the opening variants about that. And I would also say that we don't want the like Agricola we just said, oh, the family version is terrible, nobody plays that. I would love it, in fact, if say it was a shorter night, you had some newer people coming over to your house, oh, I really want to play this game Flow, and they go, oh, we can't play it because we've already gone into the third scenario and it's this massive undertaking. Now that we've gotten there, you can just go straight back to that opening feeling of that first game and hopefully still just enjoy it just as much for what it does and what it offers, and have a really good core experience with that and weigh that out. Or you can have some choice and be like, again, Carcassonne, it's like, I wouldn't play base Carcassonne even with a new player at this point. It's too much of an introductory game, really. I'd say, yeah, let's play Carcassonne, but we got to have at least like Inns and Cathedrals, like the first couple expansions, and we got to have the pig, right? We got to have the pig. So you just throw in a few little choice things that you think are going to bring it up to that level that's going to have the richest experience for that first player. And I think an owner of this game is going to be able to discern what that is pretty easily.
So Ryan Michael again, a question. What is the best player count for this? I primarily play at 2, so I want to make sure this is a good player count for this game.
2 would be fantastic, really. So, Henry and I would play it at 2 a lot, and we just laugh and have a lot of fun. And you can see all the levers pulled, and you get that interaction of your opponent. They're putting the race on you. I would say this is like we talked about the 4Xing. It's not like a combat game where I got to fight this person and 3-player dynamic. This one's in the corner and attrition. We fight each other here. It's not really going to be like that. So once you're at 2 players, you'll be able to really see all the levers turn. And just like with any 2-player game, things will be a little bit more zero sum. If I take the kelp, then you can't take the kelp, and vice versa. And the difference in the score is like if you're pushing the clock of the game, you're the one pushing the clock of the game. If you don't, then I know there's not a third party that's going to sneak up on like that. So you can kind of read those dynamics, which I think are pretty fun. And the downtime is going to be less, just like with any game. If you have more people sitting around the table taking turns and you're a good patient person, you're going to let them have their time with the talking stick and do their turn, take out their carry out their stuff. And if they ask questions, all that. So games naturally are longer with more players. So I'd say 2, it's fantastic, and I say 3, it's there. And I think it's one of those things with 4, it's going to be a bit longer, but you should know that going into it, just because that's how every game is. 7 Wonders with 7 people is longer than 7 Wonders with 3 people. It just is, even though it's a simultaneous game. There's just questions and things asked and administrative stuff you have to do to play games that are with higher player counts.
You should subscribe to Maddox's Law, which is in a Eurogame, the optimum player count is maximum player count -1. That's my law.
I like
So
that. Yeah.
to back that up, I'm not going to be able to do this.
This guy.
Vasiliadis says, playtester for Fantasia here. Many two-player flow games under my belt. Feels great for me. Game is exciting in all player numbers.
So he lets everybody call him Bill. So he's our lead playtester, and he's very good at games. And so if Bill has a hot take and said something doesn't work, it's like I gotta like get back under the hood and fix something. So if Bill says it's good, it's working good. And Bill's one of our primary testers for Unconscious Mind, who's also one of the tournament players or champions of our little Endless Winter tournament. So that's quite an endorsement coming from Bill. So it's like, that's a good thing.
I'm playing on hard mode. He's Vasily for me and always will be. So Justin and Hannah again, what's your favorite strategy when playing the game? Hunting in the caves, rushing the flow stones onto the board, lots of endgame scoring cards and allies, rushing landmarks, etc.
So I think it's pretty fascinating to see kind of the different mini games. So I'll kind of say what I like in a moment, but I've watched some games where, so one of the people we work with is Danny Garcia, who's kind of like an emerging, really, really good designer, just did Barcelona and Aboria, which I helped him work on as developer, and he's got some other cool projects in the works. And he's very much a traditional Euro player, right, in his style and his design approach, and he's not crazy about dice and output randomness like that with the conflicts and stuff. Even if you went in with modifiers and all that other stuff or drawing random cards, he wants to kind of play the Euro game. And when he plays this, he plays the Euro game. He gathers the resources as efficiently as possible. He builds the buildings. He creates this little tableau, and he knows when to go there to get the most efficiency and then turn those things into the other thing, and is able to just play this very Euro. He kind of sculpted a Euro game out of his corner of flow, which is cool. And then we see some other players do kind of like a mixed strategy where they kind of see like the low hanging fruits, like, oh, if I at least put a couple flow stones out, that's bare minimum, raise a couple tracks, I'll specialize in those. And if I go into the monsters, I can grab a couple here. And I think I can identify and grab stones from these different spots. Then you've got your player who's just like, monsters, dice, yeah, you had me. And so they go in there and they just pound on, it's like, I'm going back to the cave. And then they get knocked out. And then they get more warmth. And they go right back in with potions. And they just keep having at it. And they're like, I'm going to get that guy. And then we see at the end, it's like, well, all right, the game tips over, ends. They reveal their scoring cards. And all of a sudden, everybody's within 1 or 2 points of each other. And you look at, whoa, Danny, you didn't even go into the cave at all. Is this game broken? Should we allow you to do that? Should we do something that's like, you can't build your fifth building until you go into the cave and like gate that? Or should we just allow this sandbox experience to create those two things? And I think it's fun that there's both. And to me, I'm kind of like a Switch player. I like to go between those different things. I get envious if I see somebody having too much fun in the cave. I want to go in the cave and throw some dice too. But then I'm like, oh, I want to build an engine. I want to put my familiar there and run off this whole thing of chain combos. It's like, so I like a good mixed strategy. And I feel like that when I play a lot of my favorite games have a lot of mini games in there. And I kind of think about these games have 5 or 6 systems in them, and I'll try to do like 4 of the 5 or 6 systems. Otherwise, you're spread too thin. So it's like, okay, Trajan or Castles of Burgundy or something like that. It's like, you kind of invest in a certain thing. It's like, I'm not going to mess with the animals this time. I'm going to go this way and build these types of buildings and see if I can make that work, or I'll try the boat strategy. And so I'll kind of pick a subset of the mechanics and work within those and see if I could hybridize something that feels satisfying and is also competitive.
So Aduno's got a production question. Can we have all of the rules in the rulebook from the start? A lot of people are averse to placing stickers in their rulebook or product in general. Can there be an advanced rule area in the book?
I think what we could maybe do, which I haven't really asked about, is we could probably do a PDF version of it that has like everything pre-stuck in there. So if you wanted to just have that on there or print it yourself, I think so. But I don't think where it's in the stars to provide a fully printed version of the book and then the one with the stickers and another one, because those kind of add up to cost, and it's a little bit tough. So the thing I would look at is when you crack the shrink on the game, when you punch the sprues, when you do, unsleeve the cards, all that, there's going to be a certain amount of wear and tear. And I know people like to, they're versed using like roll and write games. They don't want to use the pad of paper, so they carefully take one and then they laminate it and they buy dry erase and stuff like that. And I get that because I'm a little bit that way too. Like I like my stuff to stay nice, and I like to be able to think, oh, if I don't like this, I could sell it and it'll basically be new. I don't think anybody would not want to like acquire a copy of Flow because there's a few stickers in the back, or if they just opened it up right away, carefully put all the stickers in there, and just told themselves not to read it. I think that rulebook would be just as good as one that was pre-printed.
But in theory, there could be a
But
PDF down the line.
I think there's nothing wrong with that, and we just say it's spoilers alert if you want the PDF. Here it is, and that would make a lot of sense too, just for clarifications and things.
So, Oroka, how in depth is your communication stroke work with game trays? You mentioned in the Kickstarter that there are ideas for potential expansions later down the road. Will the inserts already account for that?
So that's kind of something that Yoma would do a little bit more than me. So I do work with some of those stuff, like if a tray doesn't feel good or something like that to work, and I'll kind of report back that it needs a thumb tab or something like that. But that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse as far as it goes. But we try not to have something that feels incomplete. Like if you got a egg carton and there's 6 eggs in it, there's 6 holes in it. It kind of feels like a little unsatisfying. So if we do have any sort of extra space, like if with like some of our other products, it's like, yeah, the box is full, but there's also like a little foam pad over here because we might anticipate something. If we have stuff to go there, we're going to kind of anticipate where that stuff would go. But ultimately, we're looking at this product as it is now and getting everything to that box packed really nicely and offering what this has. And we really need to see if people are hungry for more content for this game, or if they're really satisfied with the variety that comes with it. And therefore, we don't want to oversize the box and be like, oh, there's a box that's full of air, because ultimately people are just happy with it as it was. So that's a trade-off that we'll have to make at some point.
So as a solo player first, I love the Rise of Fenris campaign expansion for Scythe. Is the monster expansion similar in any way, or would you make an expansion like this in the future?
I'm not familiar with that one. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not, I'm afraid. It's a story campaign, though, Rise of Fenris.
Oh,
and it
okay.
reveals things. It's not legacy because it's resettable, but it reveals things as you go through the campaign. So
right.
rules are revealed, things are revealed as you go through.
Okay, so like as far as the solo Muka, so for instance, I worked on Merchant's Cove for Final Frontier Games, and I built the bot for that. So there's the peddler, and you can play against the peddlers and the merchants, and it'll try to outsell you, outmaneuver you in the docks and things like that. And then that product, the co-designer Drake came up with like a 36-page, 12-scenario solo campaign where you can play these different modules. It would change a bunch of rules, and some of them are multi-part, like this is part A and part B of this 2-part story. I don't really think we have the bandwidth to do that right now, given how big this game already is, to also try to sculpt like a pretty in-depth solo thing and make sure it all works, and then also try to repurpose a lot of parts or have parts that are exclusively for that. So I don't know if that's really the direction we could go with that, especially right now. It would be something if there's mass amount of demand down the way, I would say it'd be something we'd actually want to bring in an expert designer who's done that kind of content before and have them build it out for us with our existing systems in place. Like, here's how Flow works. What can you do to make more progressive disclosure for a solo player to have this sort of experience? And that would have to be something where we have proper lead time, 6 months or a year of development for it.
So, firstly, Board Game Gumbo says, just backed. Thanks for some great explanations about the game. You convinced me.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not going to do his accent. I don't want a diplomatic incident. Justin Nichols, sorry if already discussed. What was a memorable aha moment when you solved a design problem or different mechanics that came together well? Thanks.
So we knew that we wanted to have these little familiars in the game. How much fun is it to have a familiar? And so there was kind of like this, what will they do? How will they help you? And we thought, okay, if you've got your hero and you've just got this card that says you have a familiar and it lets you do this thing, and somebody's just saying, okay, but does that justify it being a figure? If it's always moving around with you in tandem, or if they're even attached, like say the bases came together and that they just moved around, it's like, oh, this is a hybrid special ability because of Arhoot, and I've also got this familiar. I've got Arhoot's ability, I've got this familiar's ability, and then they just stomp around as a, both in the same trench coat kind of thing. That didn't really feel right, and so part of I kept feeling like this needs to be sort of independent and be able to go do things on your behalf, right? Do little favors for you and pick stuff up. But it shouldn't be just as good as the hero, because then it might steal the thunder. It's like, oh, I'm just operating two heroes with different rules. And it's like, oh, that's a lot of upkeep. So as we're kind of brainstorming around those things, and we've got the system, which I think is really cool for the movement, which is you don't pay like per hex. You don't pay per square like in a chessboard. It's like you're moving from terrain to terrain, a little bit like maybe like Tobago, if you ever played that before. But in this case, you cross over the waters. That costs you a warmth. If you do that with the boat, it costs you a warmth. You have the hero, it costs you warmth. That's kind of the currency. So you might get this long glacier and just be like, oh, that's just one step to go from here to here, because there's only one break in that connection. Where it's a proper like hex board, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes away is 4 steps. So this has a very organic kind of feel to it, and it has that connective tissue of those shallows. In so doing, your hero never goes into those shallows, because it's the thing that's preventing you from going from ice to ice, water from water. And so if you think about it, there's actually physical real estate in between that was kind of underutilized. And that's one of those things. It's like, what if the familiar is kind of like within range of you, because it's like more like a pet or something like this, where it wants to stay near your side. It's there to help you, but it can get into little areas you can't, because they're smaller, they're quicker, or they're better at swimming or something like that, because they're not all in the same wizard garb. Like our doesn't want to like peel down and jump in and get that kelp, but his little furry friend might be like, splash, go for a little dive and get it for you. So this idea of basically using that connective tissue that was originally just for the movement to also have it house where the worker placement is for the familiars, and kind of separate those out. Like the familiars never go onto the other terrains, the heroes don't go on this. And so you get this kind of like you're looking at the same board with two lenses. I want to do a move that's good for my hero, and I want to do one that's good for my familiar. How can I position that? What opportunities does that open up? And it's bounded in a sense that if I say, okay, I'm going to put Arhoot over here, and a mile away, I'm going to put my familiar, that's a lot of things to take in. So in this case, your choice matrix is more like having headlights. You see, like, this is where I am now, and within this proximity, this range, I can go and grab those things. Maybe even like allegory like Zelda, it's like you've got a boomerang. You can throw the boomerang over the lava and pick up the key, but the boomerang only goes so far, right? And it's that kind of idea that you got this little buddy that can just do things for you. You go to town, you can do this other little thing for you there. You go into the caves, and you can jump into the fray if you want. And so he's always kind of bounded to the action that your hero is ultimately doing.
So Danny Brandt says, can you share any info on how the co-op mode will function?
Yeah, so it's if you want to kind of think of it as like there's a lot of the co-ops where you're putting out fires, metaphorically, right? There's a bunch of things you want to handle. So if we thought about each of the monsters as being that metaphorical fire, like, this is wreaking havoc and flow. You can't win the game unless you, the players, overcome this challenge. And in order to still also overcome the game, you still need to do the fundamental things of the game. So that means like, oh, all we have to do is gather weapons and go beat the Kraken. It's like, no, it's not going to be that easy. You still need to build your home and get your warmth meter and go get soup and go on these little side quests and get the stuff and get the pearls in order to get the weapon, in order to do the other stuff, and go into the subterranean area in order to roll some dice to get some experience and level up and get yourself where you're equipped to handle these things. And some of the handling of that might be something where it's like, if you go and do this task and I do this other, say like Forbidden Island or something, like you can kind of triangulate on how to literally cooperate to overcome this thing. And then each hero has to have kind of their bare minimum of flow stones that they've placed, or victory points that they've gained on top of putting out those fires. And to not spill too much of the beans, but it's going to start off where it's like you're going to deal with one of the monsters first, which is going to warm you up progressively into this. And then your second campaign, then you're going to be dealing with a different monster kind of thing. And then you're going to be dealing with situations where there could be more than one monster. It's going to up the difficulty right there. It's like, because there's multiple fires to put out. So that's kind of the gist of it. And we're obviously still in development. So there's a lot of things that may change as far as just how many acts that's structured into. It's one of those things where it's like, do you play this monster, then that monster, then that monster, and the last one? Or is it something where you play this monster, and then 2 monsters, and then 3 monsters, and then 4 monsters? We're going to decide which one of those things ramps up the experience in the right rate. and decide if there's a variant where we want people to individually taste each of these experiences or the compounds, or how that's going to roll out, and present those options in a clear way.
We are Thomas Mondra Pedersen. As a father of 2, 5 and 6 years, I would like to play a simplified version of the game with my kids. Will you be talking or showing more about the teaching and learning campaign?
Let's see. So it'll be probably luckily your kids will be a little bit older when it comes out, right? Because games do take a little while to make, and that's the thing. I think that might be a little bit on the young side for that, but with help and showing them their options, what they can do, and explaining those things clearly, I don't really see why with some guided play that they couldn't enjoy themselves. It's like, do you want to go into the cave? Okay, we'll count how much more it takes to go down there. Okay, and your dice is at 3. All right, roll the dice and count how many arrows you have. Do you have enough arrows to beat this monster? Right, and so you could walk through somebody like that, and they might make the most like cutting strategic decisions, but they'll be able to experience a lot of those core systems in a way. There's a little bit of reading involved, so you might get a special item that says, "Oh, when you go diving, you're allowed to do this," and so it's depending on the reading level, or if you just want to read that, what it does to them, and they could memorize how it works. And again, I think just presenting the options to them as they play the game will make sense. It's like, you're running out of warmth, you need to go back and get some and go to the place where there's the most villagers because they kind of warm you up. Okay, so there's a lot of, I think, simple heuristics that kids could grab versus like stock investments or something like that, or very abstracted system, or something like unconscious mind. I would not say all this stuff. Do you want to cure somebody's dreams with this pathology and shed their grief layer through catharsis, or do you want to go downtown Vienna? And it's like those right there. You just see like, okay, there just isn't the experience for a kid to immerse themselves in the Freudian psychiatry world as there is with the allegories between adventures and what they know from like games like Zelda and popular culture like that. So I think this game will be much more accessible to kids, and it might be one of their favorite games as they grow into it.
So Joshua Timchin, if players can steal a boat from across the map, are the boat minis necessary? Was there a time you couldn't steal a boat so easily?
Yeah, so there's been some changes between builds. That's one of those things. Like the boat's been a little tricky. I kind of mentioned that the geography of the map is changed to make the boat moving faster. And in the current rulebook, if you kind of go back and look in there, we've implemented that there's actually a cost to use a harbor, which is you pay a bubble cost in order to do it. And so if you're just being mean and burning bubbles to take the boats away from somebody versus using one opportunistically that's in front of you, it's just more efficient to do that. And so the side effect that's happening nicely in our playtest right now is somebody does pay the bubble, take the boat, whatever, and then they go out and do that. And somebody says, well, I can reach where I want to go fine right now, or I can spend the bubble, take it from you, and then get there by this other method. Do I want to spend my bubble on doing that, or do I want to spend it and go make a wild and do something that's good for me? And it seems to have actually loosened up that economy where the default heuristic is, if you can steal a boat, steal a boat. And it was like that for too long. And so luckily we're working on that. And there's also some stuff in the wings right now that we're testing, which I'm pretty excited about, which is that if you've got a flow stone on a given glacier, that you can use that as a harbor to bring the boat to that spot. So originally everybody has presence at the center of town. You can bring the boats there at the harbor. But once you embark, you just have to be at the pier with the thing. And so in this case, if you've run out there and put a flow stone deeper into the area, it's kind of like you've got your mark on the land, which answers an earlier question, why then you could use the boat to get around a little bit like that if you pay the bubble cost. So we're definitely finding more dynamics to pin on that vessel, as it were.
So, Magdalena Michovska, I can see that there are many different things for our heroes to do, but thematically, what is the game about? What are our heroes doing in the world other than just wandering about?
Well, that sounds like real life to me. So it's a good existentialist question. With existentialist answer, it's to say you need to make local meaning of what you're doing and create an identity for what that is. If you decide that you're going to build the best houses or create the best, soup kitchen, whatever that may be, and find things that you're passionate about and create that, I think you kind of need to do that in Flow too, and create that identity. If you've got a combative, adventurous spirit and you want to go and hoard crystals and turn them in and level and be the best fighter with the coolest weapons and all that, that's an identity you'll have to cultivate and see that go there. And you can compare that even to the other players and be like, I got to the end of the cave before all of you did. I've got the coolest stuff. I went in there and I didn't even worry because I was rolling so many dice, right? You could create a sense of ego and value in what you're doing by doing that. Or if, like the Danny Garcia, it's like, I never went into the cave and I built all the houses. And when I put my worker down there, my income was crazy. And I just get this big old loot and then I can go spend that. And the economics feel loose to me. I've worked myself into the upper middle class of Flow through engine building, right? So I think that's where it's going to come down to is the game isn't going to prescribe you want to be the richest, most greediest tycoon, like so many games do, or you want to please the king and he's going to give you a favor, like these weird goalposts that they give in so many games. In this case, it's like, who do you want to be as your hero? Do you want to be the most robust builder? Do you want to be the most robust adventurer? Do you want to be the person who flipped over the most map tiles and be like, I showed all of us this entire space because I opened up that one and I was first to see all these things, right? Or I want to venture and go see all the landmarks and put my cubes out there, interact with the special abilities and try to time exactly when those special abilities are going to have the best return, because that's a big part of that landmark system. So I think just like in real life, we need to craft our local identity, what we mean in our to our peers, and that's going to be the other players or the other heroes, if that case, or what you think that identity is going to mean to the villagers in that town. If you imagine them living and being there and kind of just staying in their little cozy town, you're the one that goes out and tells them about the world and brings back the epic stories and the lore and kind of rebuilds the culture of Flow.
So Rahika asks, in regard to the boosters, and have the game box in regards to the boosters and have the game box be more simple before bringing more, will the insert allow for an easy distinction between booster content and base content, which will help bringing in new players with less complicated content?
That's probably a good question. We probably need to figure out how we want to separate some of that stuff out. And so I felt like with Endless Winter, we have the big box like that, and we did have a separate place that you could say keep the expansion animals that worked with more rules and a little bit different than the base game animals in there, and kind of keep them separate. And you could choose how you organize that a little bit, but ultimately I think there's gonna be some ways that you can decide how you want to put those things like that. And there's probably, I mean, ultimately speaking, if we say there's like 150 landmark cards and you needed to cull out 27 of them that came in a booster pack, that's kind of a big chore, and we'd have to have some little distinguishing mark on the bottom. But ultimately, think about it, it's like, it's not going to be that many things. So even if there was, let's just say hypothetically, just 8 of these things, it's culling out even 50% of them is a very, very easy task, even if they're slotted into the same spot. You just take out these ones, you can identify the new ones, set them aside, and play with the ones that came in the base game. If it became an overwhelming sorting process, like we do need to take out a significant number of cards that is hard to mix, I think we should have a solution that can keep those clearly separated.
Paulie? Given the game's name, I'd like Johnny's official blessing to call the monsters foes.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, we should. Yeah, we should definitely think about that. I think it's a cute idea. So, so part of the thing with this is there's not a lot of like killing the monsters. You're defeating the monsters through a show of strength and things like that. And you can survive and get past the monsters and kind of a path this way if it lives and you live, that sort of thing. So we don't want to really embrace the idea that you're just going down there and like killing things. You're just showing that you're an awesome hero, and it kind of backs into the corner and you get passage to go through and take the crystals back and that sort of thing. So, so I think Foe is kind of a cute name because maybe it does show that they're adversarial, because people are wondering, like, what do these monsters ever do to you? And they're like, it's like, well, do we have to tell everybody that they're stealing everybody's children at night for us to justify going in there and taking the crystals back? Or did they just take all the crystals from the realm and hoard them down there because dragons love crystals and things like that, and you're just trying to get your fair share back? So I think a nice in-between name like that kind of hints that they're not the most savory characters would be nice.
So, Joe Jackson, a clarification for my question about variants. I'm wondering if you feel there is flexibility in the game system when it comes to community-driven custom variants and game modes.
Yeah, I mean,
people make their own stuff.
Oh, as far as crafting extra stuff, like having blank cards and building fan content, I don't know if we've really thought about that. It's probably something that if there's demand for it, we have really good graphic designers and stuff, and we could put the templates on BGG and say if you want to make your own landmark card and source some artwork like that and print it out and do something with that. I could see that working. And so we would never say, we're not going to put out the template for this item card and have people fill in the blanks with some graphics like that. They totally could. I think if they wanted to use subsets of the actual content of the game that they like the best to sculpt an experience, that would be something that's very on par with our other stuff. Like Unconscious Mind has a ton of modules, and Endless Winter has a lot of expansions. You can play with the cave paintings, you can play with the new animals, you can play with the new heroes, you can play with the landmarks, or any mix thereof. And you can play with more landmarks or less landmarks. And so we do like to have that that choice architecture where you can kind of prime the game to feel a certain way by stacking the deck a little bit, and those options will be here too.
So Nevo Alsberg asks, I've seen that there will be unlockable content for known systems and some brand new modules. As for the extra known content, will it be things like just more cards or larger map tiles?
It's going to be like boostery things. The rules are going to be some stuff that's going to feel fresh like that, but there's not going to be something like the risk. Let's just say that there's more tiles being put into play versus we're going to have problems with the ultimate footprint of the game. We're trying to scale it down to fit a certain table size, so we can't just say here's an expansion board that you put on the side. It's another sideboard, and then all of a sudden it doesn't really fit on the table. So there's going to be some stuff where we're looking at the ultimate table space, where it comes from. Some things that are really nice components that are expensive to manufacture, we don't want to substitute those for more of a worse component. So let's say we've got dual layer player boards already with recessed tracks, and like those are not, they're heavy, they're more expensive to make, and we like the fact that those exist. We wouldn't want to introduce something like another type of player board in this case that has slightly different slots on it and bounce that cost back to the player. So the things that change might be the qualitative things, like you can plug in this hero placard to change this mainframe that you've got, but the mainframe itself won't change per se. So we're very conscious about how do you get things to feel different without literally building twice as much of a game and weight and expense to the customer in order to have that. So we're not going to have like a Frosthaven size box. Not much content in the game is just not really in the wings for us.
So Frederick 360, will there be, or are there any plans for additional heroes besides the ones already revealed? I need a chunky squirrel hero, which I think is a sentiment we can all get behind.
Yeah, I mean, don't we? So if you're kind of aware that there's 4 heroes and 4 familiars in the base game, and then there's 2 more heroes and 2 more familiars in the expansion. And so right there you've got more heroes than you can play with. It's not a 5 and 6 player expansion. It still caps out at 4 for other reasons. And so you get that variety. But one thing I think we have to remember is that, let's say if you're playing Arhoot, you get Arhoot's different kind of tech tree cards that you can invest experience point level ups into making Arhoot better at sailing if you want mobility like that. Or you can say Arhoot's going to be better at doing this other thing. So you're kind of choosing these branching paths. And once you complete one, sure, you can then become a good sailor, and then you can do the other one if the game runs long enough to run through some of these cards. So to give Arhoot, say, more replay value, it's really a matter of, are there more of those decks of cards that unlock those abilities? And then you as a player, which ones do you choose to do first, second, and third if you get that far? And same thing with these other characters. So we could introduce a whole bunch more characters that look a bunch of different ways, but what's going to give them their characteristics for real is going to be the rules that comes with their cards. And same with the film heroes. Like, what's on that placard? Does it give you any new dice faces or things like that? Or do we throw in something like the Arnak expansions, which I thought were pretty clever, where they do introduce a new character, but more so importantly is they have like actually a new mechanism that goes with it. That's one of the things that right out the gates we don't want to do that because it's more stuff to handle. But I think Arnak was interesting that they said this one has an extra meeple, it gets to do an extra thing, and that feels very different than just saying you can turn in 2 food for a stone at any time on your turn, and that's your character ability, right? So I would like to lean that way a little bit, where if we do create more content like that, that it's not just another figure that does more of the same thing. It should incorporate a little bit more rules complexity. So one of the thoughts, there's a little placeholder right here, is we might make one of the 5th or 6th characters that comes in the monster one to actually be kind of an expert on dealing with the monsters themselves. The problem with that is if somebody says, I want to use that character because I like that sculpt, I want to play it in the normal game where there aren't any monsters, it won't really be backwards compatible. So that's going to be something I need to take a temperature on people if they're going to warm up to that, or if we need to have alternate contents, like in monster mode, this guy works this way and that works that way. Why can't Arhu have a monster mode thing? And all of a sudden we've got this thing where if one person does it, one hero does it, everybody does it. Yeah. So we'll make a decision about how we roll out those last 2 characters and how different they're going to be from the base characters to create a good experience.
Okay, so we've got 2 more questions then.
Sure.
So firstly, Joshua Timchin, was there a time when you had a single encounter deck rather than the current 3 decks? Is it more for theme that you have 3, or mechanical reasons as well?
It's mostly theme. So the artwork in those decks kind of reflects where you're going. So if you got the encounter by doing something in the water areas, it's likely you've met a big whale that needs you to help him deliver something like this. And if you met somebody in the ice, it's like that. So you get kind of the sensation, and the required ingredients and the skills are also corollary to those things. So if you go on a water quest, it's likely that you're going to need pearls and kelp to undergo that thing. And so mechanically you actually have I'm going to pull this encounter. I have no idea if it's going to need one of these 4 resources, and this one happens to be my dump stat. I go like, oof. But if you're strong in, let's say, kelp and pearls, and you go do water quests, you pull those cards, you know that deck isn't going to throw a curveball and suddenly say, hey, this whale needs a big piece of wood to build a house. Like, it's just not going to happen. So mechanically, those are separated a little bit there. And then the 3rd deck kind of deals with the subterranean stuff where it's currently where you're kind of trying to not only roll the dice for the results you need to do what you're doing, but also save some particular faces in order to fulfill a quest. So that kind of takes away that idea, is like, oh, I'll just beat all the monsters by having a ton of dice. Well, now it's like, if you also want to do this quest, you got to do that and try to also have these dice set in this game state, so that way you satisfy this quest to get maximum efficiency out of that. To roll back to the front of the question is, did we need 3 different decks to do all that? And one of the things with the current introductory mode of the game is actually that there isn't a whole bunch of decks out there, that there's kind of a single blue flag card that has some options on it. And it just says, when you go do a blue flag encounter, instead of taking the card, putting it in front of you, doing all this rigmarole, you just pick one of the things that's available in this particular game, what that represents. When I get a pink flag, I can either take a crystal or I can take a such and such thing. So it's just some simple options. And I think that's going to be much more welcoming for kids too, where it's like, oh, here's a card and you have to figure out what this guy wants. And there's a bunch of added spinning plates. I think that's a little beyond their capacity, and at first at least, and it'd be better to be like, oh cool, you got a pink flag, let's look at the pink flag card of this game. Would you like a crystal or would you like a level up? Okay, they make a choice based on that, and it's much easier to digest that whole process. And those are face up from the get-go, and you can just kind of know what you're getting into.
So Sugar Circuit has a good final question, I think, which is, what would you say to those of us who are backing for $1 because we like the ideas, but right now it's not quite clicking?
Yeah, I mean, I think dollar backing is a safe thing. We usually keep our pledge managers open. I post on BGG what we're doing with the game. We make our TTS mods for Tabletop Simulator if people want to play that. There's going to be more streams of people doing it if they're, say, a solo player and they want to see the solo mode before they actually buy the game, how it works. It makes some sense. So ultimately, it's like if they're putting $1 just to keep their foot in the door in order to lock in the best price, or if they don't, but then late pledge while the campaign's open, it's not that much of an ask to just kind of keep that there. So I'd say if you're on the fence about it, yeah, $1 back, hang out, just get the updates, see what you think, give feedback on things you might want to see in the game, because we do listen. And when it comes down to us closing the pledge manager, you can decide if you want to get on board or not at that point, or just donate the $1.
Excellent. Well, that was wonderful. I think we all agree with Joshua, but he says thanks for answering all of our questions, Johnny. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the channel. Thank you, everybody who watched this. And thank you for asking your questions. It was absolutely fabulous. This will go pretty much instantaneously to watch later onto the 5 Games for Doomsday YouTube channel. So if you want to tell your friends, or if you just want to re-watch Johnny's incredible performance, you can go onto the channel, and do that. Also, I'm a little self-serving. So if you want to subscribe to the channel, if you want to, I don't know, throw me some money. I'm not going to put my postal address on this, but find out through friends. Send me 100 quid. But anyway, thank you so much. Thank you, Pika. Thank you, Johnny. And
thank you.
Axel says thank you for the Q and A. It was great. Have a fantastic day. And I think that's a great way to end. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Jonathan
everybody.
Pac.
Hey.